In the fading light of the 11th century, two worlds were colliding on the shores of the Adriatic Sea. One was the ancient, glittering Byzantine Empire, the last true heir of Rome, once mighty, now bleeding from 1,000 wounds. The other was a new force rising from the west, the Normans, descendants of Viking raiders who had carved out kingdoms with nothing but steel, ambition, and sheer ruthlessness. By the year 1081, Byzantium was in desperate trouble. Just 10 years earlier, at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, the empire had suffered a catastrophic defeat against the Seljuk Turks. Whole provinces in Asia Minor had been lost. The treasury was empty. The army was shattered. Emperors rose and fell like autumn leaves. Into this chaos stepped a young, ambitious general named Alexios Komnenos. In the spring of 1081, he seized the throne and became Emperor Alexios I. He was only in his early 30s, but he knew one thing for certain. If he didn't act fast, the empire he loved would crumble. But danger wasn't just coming from the east. It was sailing straight toward him from the west. Across the Adriatic, in the sun-baked hills of southern Italy, a man had risen who would shake the foundations of the medieval world. His name was Robert Guiscard, Robert the Cunning, a Norman knight who had started with almost nothing and had conquered half of Italy through sheer will and battlefield genius. Guiscard looked east and saw opportunity. The Byzantine Empire was weak, its emperor had been deposed, and Guiscard had a perfect excuse. His daughter had been married to the old emperor's son. When that emperor was overthrown, Guiscard claimed he was defending his family's honor. In reality, he wanted something far bigger. He wanted Constantinople itself. Little did either man know that their clash would produce one of the most dramatic and heartbreaking battles in medieval history. A day when the legendary Varangian Guard, the emperor's elite axe-wielding Vikings, would meet their doom at the hands of Norman knights. This is the story of October 18th, 1081, the day the Norman storm broke over Byzantium. Robert Guiscard was no ordinary knight. Born the son of a minor Norman lord in northern France, he arrived in southern Italy in the 1040s with just 5 horsemen and a burning ambition. Within 20 years, through cunning, betrayal, and brutal battlefield victories, he had become Duke of Apulia and Calabria. He crushed Lombard princes, drove out the last Byzantine garrisons from Italy, and even began the conquest of Muslim Sicily alongside his brother Roger. Chroniclers called him Guiscard, the Cunning, because he was as clever as he was ruthless. He understood politics as well as he understood the charge of heavy cavalry. He married into powerful families, switched sides when it suited him, and always kept one eye on the ultimate prize. By 1080, Guiscard had secured southern Italy. The Pope himself had recognized him as Duke, but he wasn't satisfied. He wanted glory on a Roman scale. When the Byzantine Emperor Michael VII was overthrown in 1078, Guiscard saw his moment. He announced he was invading the empire to restore his son-in-law to the throne. In truth, it was a thinly veiled excuse for conquest. In May 1081, Guiscard gathered a massive invasion fleet, over 150 ships, carrying thousands of Norman knights, Italian infantry, and Lombard allies. His eldest son, Bohemond, already a formidable warrior in his own right, sailed with him. They crossed the Adriatic and landed near Avlona. Within weeks, they had marched north and laid siege to the strategic port city of Dyrrhachium, the gateway to the Balkans and the road to Constantinople. The city's walls were strong, but Guiscard's men were veterans. They built siege towers, dug trenches, and prepared for a long fight. Meanwhile, back in Constantinople, the new Emperor Alexios received the news with alarm. Dyrrhachium was not just a city, it was the key to the western provinces. If it fell, the Normans could march straight toward the capital. Alexios knew he had to act. But his army was still rebuilding after years of civil war and Manzikert. He scraped together every available man, regular Byzantine troops, Turkish mercenaries, Frankish knights, and the most feared warriors in his service, the Varangian Guard. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were axe-bearing giants, mostly Anglo-Saxon exiles who had fled England after the Norman conquest of 1066. They hated Normans with a burning passion. Many had lost homes, families, and lands to William the Conqueror and his knights. Now, 15 years later, they were about to face their old enemies again, this time under the banners of Byzantium. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic confrontations in medieval history. By late summer 1081, Dyrrhachium was under full siege. Guiscard's forces surrounded the city by land while his fleet blockaded it from the sea. The defenders held out bravely, but the situation inside the walls grew desperate. Food ran short, disease spread, yet they refused to surrender. Guiscard himself faced problems. His camp was struck by sickness. According to the Byzantine historian Anna Komnene, the emperor's own daughter, thousands of his men died, including many knights. His supply lines were under threat from the Venetian fleet, which had come to help the Byzantines. Still, Guiscard refused to retreat. He was a man who believed that bold action could overcome any obstacle. In Constantinople, Alexios worked feverishly to assemble a relief army. He called in troops from every corner of the empire, from Macedonia, Thrace, and even the last remnants of his forces in Asia Minor. He hired Turkish and Pecheneg horse archers. He brought in Frankish mercenaries, and at the heart of his force, he placed the Varangian Guard, around 1,000 elite warriors armed with massive double-headed axes. These English exiles burned for revenge. They had waited years for a chance to strike back at the Normans who had destroyed their homeland. By early October, Alexios marched west with an army estimated between 20,000 and 25,000 men. It was a polyglot force: Greeks, Turks, Bulgarians, Armenians, and the towering Varangians. The two armies were now on a collision course. Guiscard, learning of Alexios's approach, prepared his own men. His son Bohemond commanded one wing. Other trusted Norman lords led the rest. The Norman heavy cavalry, the most feared knights in Europe, formed the striking force. On October 17th, the Byzantine army camped near Dyrrhachium. Alexios could see the Norman siege lines in the distance. He knew the moment of truth had arrived. That night, both sides prepared for battle. Weapons were sharpened, prayers were said. Men wrote last letters home. Dawn on October 18th, 1081, would decide the fate of empires. October 18th dawned clear and tense. The two armies formed up on the plains outside Dyrrhachium, with the sea on one side and the city walls on the other. Alexios positioned his forces carefully. He placed the Varangian Guard in the center, right in front of his main line, supported by archers. These axemen were meant to absorb the shock of any Norman cavalry charge and then counterattack. On the wings, he deployed his Turkish and Pecheneg light cavalry and regular Byzantine troops. Alexios himself took command of the center, determined to lead from the front. Across the field, Robert Guiscard arranged his men in 3 divisions. His son Bohemond commanded the left wing. Another loyal Norman lord led the right. Guiscard himself held the center with his heaviest knights. The Normans were outnumbered, but they had confidence. Their heavy cavalry tactics, the couched lance charge, had proven devastating in Italy and Sicily. The battle opened with skirmishes. Norman light cavalry probed the Byzantine lines, trying to draw them out. Alexios held his men steady. Then, the Varangians began to advance. These English giants, carrying their enormous axes, marched forward with a battle cry that echoed across the plain. They were no longer just bodyguards. They were men seeking revenge for Hastings, for the fall of England, for everything the Normans had taken from them. The fighting started in earnest. At first, things went well for the Byzantines. The Byzantine right wing smashed into the Norman left and routed it. The Varangians, seeing the enemy breaking, charged forward in pursuit, axes swinging. But in the heat of battle, they pushed too far. They became separated from the main Byzantine line. Guiscard saw the opening instantly. He was a master of the battlefield. He quickly ordered spearmen and crossbowmen to swing around and strike the isolated Varangians from the flank. What happened next would be remembered for centuries. The Varangians were now cut off. They fought like lions. Their heavy axes cleaved through Norman shields and armor, but they were surrounded. Norman knights charged them from multiple sides. Crossbow bolts rained down. Spearmen closed in. The English exiles refused to break. They formed a defensive circle and fought to the last man. According to Anna Komnene, they performed incredible deeds of valor that day. but numbers and tactics overwhelmed them. One group of surviving Varangians managed to fall back toward a nearby church. They barricaded themselves inside, hoping to hold out. The Normans surrounded the building and set it on fire. The Varangians perished in the flames. A tragic, heroic end for men who had crossed half the known world seeking a new home and a chance at vengeance. With the center of the Byzantine army shattered and the elite Varangian Guard annihilated, the rest of Alexios's force began to collapse. Alexios himself fought desperately. He was wounded. His horse was killed beneath him. He barely escaped with his life, riding through the chaos as his army disintegrated around him. The Normans had won a stunning victory. The field was littered with Byzantine dead. Estimates suggest as many as 5,000 men fell that day, including many nobles and almost the entire Varangian contingent. Robert Guiscard had done what few men thought possible. He had defeated a Byzantine emperor in open battle and destroyed the emperor's most feared bodyguard. But the day was far from over. In the days and weeks after the battle, the consequences unfolded rapidly. The Normans pressed their advantage. In February 1082, Dyrrhachium finally fell to Guiscard through treachery from inside the walls. The road to the Balkans lay open, yet Guiscard could not press on to Constantinople. Urgent news from Italy forced him to return home. The Pope was under siege and needed his help. He left his son Bohemond to continue the campaign in the Balkans. For Emperor Alexios, the defeat was devastating but not fatal. He lost thousands of men and his elite guard, but he survived. Over the next few years, through brilliant diplomacy, alliances with the Venetians, and careful military reforms, he began the slow recovery known as the Komnenian Restoration. The Battle of Dyrrhachium became a turning point. It showed the world that the Byzantine Empire, though wounded, was still dangerous. It also proved the terrifying power of Norman heavy cavalry tactics. More importantly, the defeat helped convince Alexios that he needed Western help against the Turks in the east. Years later, that plea for aid would contribute to the call that launched the First Crusade. The Varangian Guard would eventually be rebuilt, but it would never be quite the same. The English exiles who died at Dyrrhachium became legends among their people. Robert Guiscard died in 1085, still dreaming of conquest. His son Bohemond would go on to become one of the most famous leaders of the First Crusade. And so, on that single bloody day, in October 1081, outside the walls of Dyrrhachium, the medieval world shifted. Norman knights had destroyed the emperor's legendary guard. A new era of east-west conflict had begun. The echoes of those axes and lances still resonate through history today. This was the day the Norman storm broke over Byzantium, and nothing would ever be the same again.